Hello everybody, welcome to this A2 revision session for Carlam Cymru, A2 Biology. I'm Mrs Kavanagh and in this session we're going to look at succession. This is part of A2 Unit 3, Section 5. Let's have a look at our session objectives. We are going to define succession, to describe the process of succession including primary and secondary succession, and then apply our knowledge to answer exam questions. Our success criteria are shown here. At the end of this session, you will be able to define succession, you will be able to describe the process of succession, including both primary and secondary succession, and you will be able to apply your knowledge of succession to answer exam questions. Let's make a start by looking at our keywords and definitions. Firstly, succession. This is a change in the community and species composition over time. Climax community. A stable community of organisms that exists in the final stage of ecological succession. Colonisation. The occupation of a new area by a species. Pioneer species. Species that can survive in hostile environments, colonising bare rocks, for example, lichens. Primary succession. Pioneer species colonise a newly exposed area of land. Secondary succession, when a habitat is recolonised after a period of disturbance. Seers, intermediate stages in succession, thus leading to a climax community. We are going to look at these definitions in more detail in this film. Think of strategies you can use to help you to remember these definitions. For example, you could use mind maps or flashcards. Pause the film here to learn these key words. Now let's look at why succession is important. Succession increases species diversity and increases the stability of the community. This means that we have an increase in the variety and the number of individual species in a particular area when succession is working correctly. This also means that the community of organisms in a particular environment or habitat are stable. Primary succession. Pioneer species colonise an area. This area here is bare rock. Lichens are an example of pioneer species. As the lichens die and decompose, they add nutrients to the ground. Over time, this allows more complex organisms to colonise and survive, as seen here by mosses and grasses growing. We then move to the climax community. This is the final stage of succession when the ecosystem is balanced and stable. It is reached when the soil is rich enough and able to support large trees or shrubs and the environment is no longer changing. Now let's look at primary succession in more detail. Primary succession takes place on land where there has been no previous life, for example on bare rock. Each stage, or seer, in succession has characteristic dominant species. They will depend on whereabouts and which environment you are based in. Pioneer species arrive first on land, for example on bare rock. Lichens are pioneer species. The lichen spores are either blown onto the land or brought by animals. Other pioneer species include mosses and algae. We're now going to look at the stages of primary succession in more detail. The lichens erode the rock, and as they do so, a primitive soil develops. Lichens change the rock surface and allow humus, which retains water, to accumulate. This now enables mosses to take hold. Mosses grow as their spores travel on the wind. Again, further erosion occurs, and also now decomposition. This soil is now able to support grass growth from seeds which are wind blown or animal deposited. Eventually, the grass community is replaced by herbaceous plants and shrubs. This is now the climax community and is woodland. Now let's look at the seral stages. At the beginning of primary succession, we have lichens, which are a pioneer species. As we move along the seral stages, mosses are able to colonise an area, followed by grasses. All the time the soil is becoming richer. Following on from grasses, more complex plants such as herbaceous plants will colonise an area. Herbaceous plants will lead to shrubs, and then finally to the climax community. We're now going to spend a little bit of time looking at this diagram. This diagram summarises succession very nicely for us. So at the beginning we can see we've got the pioneer stages. Here in the pioneer stages we start with the bare rock at the very left of our diagram. There are no plants or any sort of species here living on the bare rock. The bare rock then gives way to lichens, and lichens will colonise an area. They are a pioneer species. Spores will blow into an area from the lichens and they will start to colonise the bare rock. Over a period of time, as the lichens die and decompose, small annual plants and the lichens will still continue. So this shows progression along that pioneer stage. Later in the pioneer stage, as the annual plants and lichens die and decompose, they are adding more nutrients to the soil. Perennial herbs and grasses will form. And as you can see on the diagram as well, this isn't something that just takes place in a matter of weeks or months. It takes place over hundreds of years. In the intermediate stage, we see that we have grasses, shrubs, and shade-intolerant plants, so quite low-growing shrubs and plants that need to be able to receive plenty of sunlight in order for photosynthesis to take place. Again, as we've seen in the previous stages with the previous types of plants, that as these more complex plants, the grasses and the shrubs, die and decompose, they are increasing the nutrients in the soil. And you can see here in the intermediate stage how deep that soil now is. Finally, we move to the climax community. As you can see, the soil is very deep and that enables the roots of taller trees to be anchored very successfully here. You can see here that we have more shade-tolerant plants. This is more like our woodland community that we know in Wales. So what we have are very few plants, very few shrubs on the forest floor, and mainly taller shade tolerant trees. Let's have a look at what happens as succession through the sears continues. The soil becomes deeper. The grounds become more nutrient rich. Decomposition increases. The water holding capacity of the soil increases. Biodiversity and competition both increase. More plants of different species become established and are of different heights. There are more habitats, food sources, and niches. There might be less biodiversity in the climax community as there is more competition for light and nutrients under the tree canopy. Speed of succession. The speed of succession can vary depending on the temperature of the location, the availability of wind-blown spores and seeds, and the rock surface on which the pioneer species first colonise. To summarise, succession will occur faster in warmer climates than in those climates that are cooler. For example, succession will take place at a slower rate in taiga areas of the world, whereas succession in warmer tropical areas will be faster and climax community for that particular environment will be reached faster. Now let's look at secondary succession. This starts from cleared land where there have been previous communities. It is faster than primary succession as there are seeds, roots, and soil to support plant growth. Forest fires interrupt the process of primary succession. Moving on to deflected succession. This is the term that is used to describe when primary succession is interrupted in some way. It could be due to controlled burning, mowing, grazing, deforestation and soil erosion, and construction. Deflected succession is when a community is maintained at a sear below the climax community. This is usually due to human interference. For example, grazing animals will prevent shrubs and trees from becoming established. Similarly, mowing grass also prevents the establishment of trees and shrubs, thus preventing the development of the climax community. Conservation of communities can be achieved by deflected succession. For example, a wildflower meadow would continue to develop to a woodland climax community, but by preventing succession by mowing or grazing, this prevents the meadow from completing succession. Heather moorlands are maintained below the climax community to be the ideal environment for grouse to survive. The moorlands are burnt. This doesn't affect the roots of heather, but the new heather growth provides a source of food for the grouse. This series of pictures shows what happens to a climax community when deflected succession occurs due to fire. In picture 1, we see the woodland, which is a climax community. It has the characteristic tall trees and some lower shrubs. The woodland has highly fertile soils. As seen in picture 2, a fire has broken out in the woodland. It is damaging the trees and shrubs within the community. Continuing into picture 3, the fire is still raging, but more of the vegetation has been burnt, and the characteristic vegetation of the climax community is no longer present. Picture 4 shows us the damaged ecosystem with no vegetation at all. In picture 5, the first stages of new succession can be seen. This is termed secondary succession. The soil will be fertile as it has previously been a climax community. There will be an abundance of seeds as the environment used to have climax community plants. So the new seers in the deflected community will begin to develop more quickly than if a pioneer species were colonising bare rocks. Picture 6 shows us that low-growing shrubs are abundant. There is plenty of light available for photosynthesis. As these organisms die and decompose, they are adding nutrients to the soil, and it is becoming more fertile. This enables a wider variety and number of plants to colonise the community. As seen in picture 7, there is an increase in biodiversity. Picture 8 shows a return to the climax community. It is important to note that this would not take as long as the formation of a primary community. Let's take a look at these 2 exemplar exam questions. Pause the film and read the question. Write down your answers and restart the film. This is a straightforward recall question. It asks us to state the term which applies to the following ecological definitions. Each question is worth 1 mark. The first question asks us about the recolonisation by living organisms of a woodland following its destruction by fire. This is called secondary succession. The second question asks us for the first organisms which colonise a bare rock surface, and these are pioneer species. The third question asks us for the stable stage of a succession which undergoes no further change. This is a climax community. And finally, we are asked for the different stages in a succession, and these are termed seers. Pause the film and read the question. Write down your answers and restart the film. These 2 questions are 1 mark questions. The first one asks us what name is given to the group of organisms that inhabit the ecosystem at the end of successional change. And this is called the climax community. And secondly, what usually happens to species diversity as succession proceeds? And the answer is increases. Thanks for watching this A2 presentation on succession for Carlam Cymru. I've been Mrs. Kavanagh. See you next time.